Today's guest is Odin Berg from Picklebet, and he's mastering the arts of social advertising. We've been working together for a few months, and yeah, full disclosure, Picklebet and Windsor are working together. And yeah, I found what Picklebet doing quite interesting, and had a chat with Odin, invited him to the webinar, and here we are. He's going to share you some of his best practices, and when it comes to paid social, how to go about it, how to make the right decisions. Yeah, over to you, Odin. Thanks.
Thanks, Matthias. That's lovely. Welcome, everyone. So just to give you a bit of background, obviously we'll dive a little bit into paid social advertising. Just to give you a bit of background about myself. I'm only pretty young, so 22, 23 this year. So obviously being nice and young and fresh in the social space definitely helps, having that sort of familiarity with these platforms and how they operate. So yeah, I've kind of enjoyed a pretty fruitful and maybe a little bit too accelerated success in some of the last few years, just working with a few different clients in some different spaces. Working in health, SaaS companies, and obviously now most recently in Picklebet. So Picklebet, we are an online esports and sports betting platform, and we're essentially launching throughout a lot of North America. Australia is our primary location at the moment, and obviously I'm from Brisbane, so we can dive right into it. I'll get stuck into the next slide. Don't like it. So yeah, just to give you a bit of overview of what we'll chat about today, I guess the first thing is obviously looking at the age of privacy. This is something that I think there's no shortness of, this term being thrown around and what this means for people like myself and yourself that work in marketing, advertising, and with these paid media platforms that continue to see, a lot of parameters around data privacy and a lot of the traditional methods that they depend upon. So we'll take a quick dive into that, and then we'll kind of look at some of the key tenets, I guess, in the social space and the paid social space specifically, and then moving into just looking at some of that testing, measuring, and some of the real benefits of, I guess, what these solutions that are coming out and continue to come out, and how they can really help us as marketers continue to win and succeed in these platforms. So yeah, the age of privacy, like I said before, it's definitely a beaten up term, and it's I mean, the reality is it's here to stay. We are well and truly amidst a lot of change and a lot of changes at the moment in the social space world. I guess surrounded by a lot of these big platforms intending to create more privacy centric policies, procedures, and just data collection, and obviously allowing that data to go to the right people at the right time without any sort of privacy. Privacy is ultimately a human right, so I don't think at any stage this is probably going to start to turn in a different direction. I think this is an important fact for advertisers to start to accept and harness what this looks like and how we can really win with these. So instead of more typically just listing out some of these general, I guess, high level challenges and those solutions that we continue to see in social, or we hear about in these topics and groups, I've really just wanted to be a little bit more targeted with this, and just give you guys a bit more insight into some really actionable solutions that I find work for me at the moment. And I guess if we start to look into this, I guess the first few things that aren't a surprise to anyone that may or may not be working in paid social or have some kind of touches with paid social is looking at the rising costs. I think fundamentally, when we start to look at the breakdowns across many accounts and accounts that I touch, we know that the general costs, CPMs, have risen in the last year and a half. And the reasons for that is, I guess, is a little bit grey, but I guess one of the first things we can start to consider is just really understanding what we need to be doing to provide premium user experiences and just getting in front of the right people, because by doing that, we're going to improve all of what we're trying to do with these Facebook systems, and just working in a way in which is mutually successful for both these platforms, for us as advertisers, and then see obviously for the users and their experience. So when we look at some of those solutions, I guess we'll pass this deck around so you guys can really dive into this if you need to. But creative is obviously something that is a really big tenet in this space, and naturally a really high degree of complexity among how it's administered, processed, and just how it fits into your strategies. So obviously working with creative is really important, and just understanding those different mechanisms and what you can use. I think short video at the moment, and just understanding that multi-format strategy, and using these different formats under the same roof to be able to reach different people is something that I've found really important. And this is something that we see with a lot of platforms that have started to really prioritize this in their algorithms and just in their learning processes. So Snapchat, for example, I am aware of a few beta products that they have at the moment that are due, I think, to the regular public this year. And they're actually built around this multi-format strategy and process, allowing yourself to deliver an ad, an image, a collection ad, whatever it would be, under the same roof to the same person. We know that people are reachable in different formats. So that's the main reason for that, is that these platforms have this knowledge. They want all the power to be able to get that reach and delivery in different places. So if we look into some of the other issues, I think it's no surprises that there's a little bit more tracking issues and a little bit of inaccuracy around reporting as we kind of move through these phenomenons and how, I guess, we start to build those solutions. So if you're using Windsor, for example, I'm sure you're familiar with some of those tracking issues and just how you can, as an advertiser, start to optimize more effectively, and just starting to get that traffic, that reporting all in line with what you really want to see and analyze. I think there is a few solutions in that over time that we'll continue to see come out. But some main things at the moment is just really ensuring that you've got the basic setup done right. On Facebook, for example, aggregated event management is not even a gold standard anymore. It's essential for us as marketers to be able to pass back data from whether it's a pixel or for server-side tracking. I'll dive a little bit more into aggregated event management as we get into some more media strategy tactics, but definitely something that we all as marketers probably need to get adjusted to is the aggregated measures, and especially in the social environment. This isn't all applicable to, I guess, the wider environment, but definitely in that paid social niche. So as we start to look at those things really changing the way in which we operate, I think the next step is really looking at, what are those key drivers in a world of privacy? How can we win? How can we succeed in a world of privacy where these things aren't going to change? They're going to continue to put limitations on what we have learned and the way in which we've learned things. So I think data and creative are probably the two key tenets I'd look at here, or the pillars, in order to really build a nexus and a strategy or an approach that is, suitable to your business first and foremost, but be profitable and sustainable. So I guess the first thing I would probably want to illustrate with something like this is, really tapping into the data versus creative and the nexus between these two. I think traditionally, when I first came into the industry, it was definitely a bit of a data versus creative sense in the way that designers, media buyers in some of these places were really segregated or siloed out in what influenced their decision making and what actions or items were taken into next steps. So I think taking a holistic view at this, it's really starting to look at what these systems value. And I know Facebook, Snapchat, these systems well enough to know that creative is their most important area of providing a strong user experience. If you can give people good content and they enjoy watching it, they're going to spend more time on the platform. And ultimately, that's what these big fish want. They want people on their platform engaging with their content. So to break that down, it is a difficult process and probably something that everyone will have a unique strategy upon. But I guess this is, for me, something that really, I guess, just illustrates what we're trying to do and how these two massive players can work together to create a really strong future in the paid social space. So the way I look at it with data, and probably someone that wasn't initially a massive lover of data until I got into the space and saw it in its glory and application and how that can really help your day. I think the reality is it's becoming, if it hasn't already, it's really a compass. It's your North Star to be able to test concepts, optimize your performance, measure your success. And whilst a compass is very important, you need one, it's probably not enough on its own in this day and age. And that's where we need to start looking at diversifying some of these strategies and systems to include things that might not be traditionally, I guess, a part of that media buying process, which for many people it is new, the creative concept and the hero concept, or really leveraging your creative and operating in or at an ad level. And when I say that, I mean operating your creative, optimizing your campaigns through creatives, and really understanding that that is your needle to move. It isn't as such maybe a new audience or a new placement or a wild hack on Reddit or Twitter, wherever they come from. I think the reality is this is a proven fundamental of the last year, 2 years, that I don't think will change. And by joining these two together, we are, and I know personally, I've found a lot of success inspiring creative through strong data that we can leverage, not now, but also into the future. So breaking those two down, it's really important to build that system to understand, well, how do we create a concept? How do we create an ad, a visual ad, an image, an audio ad perhaps? And how does that come to fruition from an inside out approach? So when I say inside out, I'm talking about a media buyer, a strategist, the man, the woman in the account, owning the creative execution, the briefing processes, and the smaller details and the smaller nuances that maybe weren't so important in an age not so centered around privacy. So these are some key tenets, I guess, we'll carry throughout today, and just, yeah, going forward, this is probably something I think everyone can find a bit of benefit in, and just kind of assessing how these two things can work together for you. And obviously every business is different. Knowing those two things is pretty cool, and knowing the value of them and how powerful they can be equally is beautiful. But I think the real application of this is being able to transfer the knowledge of these two systems and how they can interact to create a playbook that you can apply to your business. That's a lot harder said than done. So as I break that down, I think there's probably a few tenets we could definitely tap into that will really help create time and resource to be able to have that focus. So the first thing is automation. I think automation is definitely another beat up term in the social space or more digital space, but there's probably a reason for it. I think it's really essential now, and every day the privacy continues to wreak havoc on what I do or what advertisers do. These systems allow us to automate processes, free up time, and put our energy, focus, creativity where it needs to be. And just tapping into some of these tools specifically, I mean, these are probably more so related to a Facebook system, but again, these are all copy and paste across a lot of platforms like your Pinterest, your Snapchat, and we will see these become more popular if they aren't already in those platforms, for the pure fact that these systems understand how intensive making creative is, and they also know that the reality is if they don't free up your time, we're going to continue to do the same thing. So looking at that, there's also a bit of a challenge that comes with automation, and I guess giving the power to these machines and the data and the learning. Is we also have a role to play as a media buyer, and looking at these tools, something like broad audiences, for example, we need to be really efficient in personalizing those ads, because it's in a broad audience. If the ad itself isn't personalized, yeah, it's probably not, I guess in my experience, the most the best converting ad if it's not personalized, if it doesn't have that zap, some touch, something to hook that audience in, keep that audience, keep them compelled, and then drive them all the way through to your website, to conversion. Sorry, I didn't hear that one too clearly. Could you say that one again for me? No? Okay.
I think there was someone forgetting his microphone, and I don't think it was English.
Me neither. I only speak English, by the way. So, yeah. So just to kind of loop all that back, I think it's really important to understand that these tools for automation and account management, even ideation tools, they're brilliant. They're awesome. We need them. And there's going to be better tools continuing to, I guess, change the way these ecosystems operate. But our role will always be there. And it's essential that we look at owning that responsibility of giving these systems discipline and parameters to operate for success. So that's I guess, one thing we can really look at here is also understanding something like templates. This is a really simple concept that changed the way in which I advertise. And not even advertise, I think my broader marketing philosophy is really built around, I guess, the foundations of templates, because what you're doing when you're building a template is taking the time to really assess the different areas of a creative. The reason for that is, one, a template is probably going to be used more than once. It's going to get a lot more spend than one particular creative or an ad hoc piece. And in doing so, you probably create a simpler creative that is easier to read. It's more digestible. And obviously, these are all very high contingency. It's high contingencies, but it is something that I've personally found really efficient. And there's a lot of really awesome platforms continuing to demonstrate how these templates and, I guess, just broader creative design can really help you as a marketer. So Canva, for example, Vimeo, these are platforms that work brilliantly for advertising, and you don't need a graphic designer. So these are definitely something to look into if you're needing that creative resource quickly, fast, or just in a different resource. So when we look at, I guess, carrying some of those tenets there and how that automation process really works, it starts to build a system, an ecosystem, or an understanding of a lack of control. And this is not the case. And I hear this often, not just among media buyers or with marketers, business owners, clientele. Automation really isn't, it's not going to cause issues with control if you manage it properly. And the reality is that the best way to manage automation is through process. It's through systems that you've developed that are a part of your own playbook that can be applied to your business. It isn't always the good and great to just copy and paste these things from elsewhere. We know that these systems are simply not copy and paste systems. So take the time to understand how you're testing things. Not every testing system is going to be the same. But when we look into something like this, I feel like this is a nice, simple example of what has changed with testing. And I guess what the more contemporary testing environment with a creative especially looks like. See, a creative test is significantly more complex than testing something like an audience or a specific headline, perhaps. These things are really dynamic. They're subjective, and you need to cross your T's and dot your I's with these. And this is something that really leads into a lot of issues that we hear around the age of privacy, which is items not getting out of testing, validated testing items not scaling once they've moved into new audiences. And the reason for that, in my experience, often comes back to insignificant testing. And looking at this, I guess it's just an example of how you can break something down, find winners, and test in a way that is multivariate. Multivariate testing is significantly more complex than something like A/B testing. The main reason for that is you're testing more. You're looking at more than one variable. And that's what's illustrated here. As you can see in step one, we've got 3 variables there, and that's being tested against a control group. So understanding that this is a really efficient way to test, because you're going to spend less in this way, you're going to have more winners at the end. And that's what's illustrated in step 3. We move through the process of reviewing initial performance, or that MVP test, and then moving into variances, concepts, different variations to validate the base concept in that creative. So moving on from that, I think it's just really important to start to understand.
Windsor X Glen.
Sorry, guys. It's really important to understand that you do need to create a creative process, pun not intended. And it's something that I think a lot of people will need to personalize for themselves, for their budgets, and for their goals. This testing process works really well for a business that's probably well-resourced and has time to do these things. So obviously we're here with Windsor, so it wouldn't be a Windsor webinar if we didn't start to talk about some attribution and measurement, and definitely something that is obviously a key tenet in the age of privacy. We're losing the ability to really hone in on that third-party, first-party cookie. And the reality is we need to create solutions, we need to create systems and structures that we can implement for value and sustainability. Windsor is something I've grown really fond of in the last, I guess, month, and obviously working really closely with Matthias and how these systems work and what we can do to really start to understand the limitations of traditional tracking. I'm not sure if you are familiar, but in my experience, a lot of Google Ads data or a lot of Google Analytics data traditionally hasn't married up perfectly with Facebook. There's a million reasons for this, and I actually share something on the final slide for you to have a read into that might give you a bit more insight as to why they're different and why they probably won't really marry up perfectly in the future. But I guess the bottom line to this is they're big fish with different interests, and they're competing against each other at the end of the day. And until that changes, I don't think we'll see a real single source of truth in that space. But that's not all bad news, because we've got the beauty of platforms like Windsor and really sophisticated and analytic techniques that allow you to assess multiple touch points, or in this case, as this graph illustrates, which is actually in my dashboard with Picklebet, is something as simple as a user touch point flow using that multi-touch attribution. It really does give you an understanding of all the different platforms that are generating traffic, and maybe in some cases, this might not be a perfect reflection of the exact amounts. I mean, in our case, we feel as though it's pretty accurate, but what it does do nevertheless is give you an understanding of those flows, what is driving that number one revenue, or in a business that's maybe getting set up or having tracking issues. Something like this can give you a really clean understanding of where things are going wrong. For example, in step 5, if you had an issue on a tracking page, if you had all sorts of different, I guess, anything that could go wrong, you're going to see those measures start to come through at over a longer period. You can see through those flows where things might be going wrong, which really helps you identify that needle or that area of improvement, which ultimately is the goal. I mean, as a marketer, it's not always the case that you can easily identify what went wrong and action that. So I think this is something that can really help you do that and just start to understand those flows and where these customers are making touch points. So something really important for social is we know that social media data and I guess tracking isn't always perfect when it comes to GA. On that, this is probably close to my favorite graph of all time. If you can have a favorite graph of all time, this has saved my life post iOS. So I think the reality of this is it's taking a step back and really being holistic. It might not have the granular details of more traditional tracking or pivot tables, but what it does do for me is give me a really clear insight on the return we've had versus spend and those trends that we see. And if you're operating your accounts and with this understanding and with this structure, and you build around these sorts of limitations, you're going to be able to have really accurate analysis. So for example, we use this graph and we cross benchmark this really intimately with the campaigns that we run on Facebook. So we'll run campaigns in a way that allows us to essentially see this, identify which campaign may have been the highest spending during that period, and then obviously make those next steps. So also something that just gives you a really quick view, or something for your managers or for cross teams to be able to get an understanding of how things are, why that spend is there, and what's really been driven on the back of that, because we know sometimes that's not always the case with these platforms. So I'll pass this one off to Matthias. I think he wanted to dig a little bit into this, as it's not all my wheelhouse.
Yeah, so I have this slide today, and now what we saw on the 2 previous slides or conclusions based on data which is connected across different platforms. And essentially what attribution does is it helps understand the entire path to conversion. And yeah, in more complex cases, like Picklebet, for example, there is multiple platforms involved. There are app conversions, analytics conversions on the website. There is a CRM system. And the whole idea of doing attribution in that context is to bring all the data together. So you want to understand, how does your media spend drive lifetime value of the customers? And we do that basically by streaming all the data in using connectors. And then I guess in your case, it's the same. You have always a joint key between the different systems. So for app or website, we have an identifier we can then use and link with the CLV data, which can be from a CRM, and yeah, put a couple of names in there. That's essentially how multi-touch attribution works. And based on the insights you get across all the touch points of the journey, you can then make better decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, to extend on that, I think the importance of lifetime value cannot be understated. I think it's really important to understand where that money is coming back into the business. At the end of the day, we don't spend money as advertisers to lose money. We want to monetize products. We want to reach a goal. So I think lifetime value is often something that works across a lot of businesses because it's that bottom line. So, and if you can have the opportunity to feed this into your data, feed this into your decision making, it's something that's going to change the way in which your accounts perform fundamentally and into the future. I think this is something that continues to gain traction along a long time, and I guess something that I would highly recommend digging into, really starting to scratch up on, because it's applicable across multiple platforms and definitely the way of the future in terms of assessing that monetization effect. So to wrap up, I know we've probably only got 2 minutes left. I just want to dump a couple of good reads here and just some maybe some really good references for you in times of a little bit of confusion if you're like me when things get a bit tough. These are 4 brands I have on the right here that I've gone to liberally over the last 3 years, and I've watched them grow on the back of their awesome strategies. And funnily enough, these 4 businesses tend to really dominate headlines and I guess information across the paid social space and the digital space because they're doing it right. And Monday and Canva, for example, the 2 very intricate systems that really, I think take the SaaS world, join that really well with a creative touch, which traditionally has been difficult. There's also a few little reads there for you. I think I've chucked something in on CRO there. I think that's just, if you haven't heard of CRO, that's conversion rate optimization. The reason I put that in there is I think it is something that gets slept on a little bit in the paid space. It's really effective in terms of moving that needle. You send all your traffic to a website in most cases. If you can improve that conversion rate by even just 0.5%, you're going to increase massively the amount of conversions, the amount of money in your business, and then more importantly, it's momentum creation. This is a way to create momentum in systems by optimizing well, having great conversion optimization. Metrics are important for that. So have a look at those metrics. They might help. And then on top of that, Matthias did a really awesome write-up. I think it was in 2018. It's still just as relevant now. I think there's obviously a few changes in these spaces since, but it did really give me a really intricate insight and just an awesome layout of why these 2 systems operate differently and what the nuances are in their data, and definitely something to look into. And then those final 2 touches there is a little bit of something for anyone that's interested in kind of trying to guess where the world's going to go in the paid space, and uplift modeling and that targeting process through more presumable effect or predictive models. That's really becoming popular in different spaces. The A/B test function on Facebook, for example, is probably a more MVP product of this. And by using that, you can do a lot of, you can make a lot of complex systems that can support unique goals and more sustainable success. Final one there for you is again, a little bit of a blast from the past, but something that I think we'll see join the automation race and join a really strong suite of tools and modeling techniques that allow us to get that actionable insight. Marketing mix modeling is actually, I think it was first kind of brought to fruition in the 1800s, 1900s. The problem with marketing mix modeling has been that it's time consuming, labor intensive. With evolutions in data technology, it started to come back into the fore, and obviously with attribution losing out a little bit in places, it's something that we continue to see these big platforms leverage. Facebook, for example, if you're interested, they have a product called Robin, ROBYN. I haven't included this on the slides, but this is something that is an example case of what these platforms are doing to use more broader applicable concepts to create that single data view for you. So marketing mix modeling, I think, will be something that we'll see in a lot of spaces over the next few years. But yeah, also just me taking a few guesses and stabs in the dark at what I think might be the case. So yeah, that's pretty much all I've kind of had in for today. I'm not sure if there's any questions or any sort of comments on that, or anyone that wants to kind of just have a bit of a chat over this. It's something I'm really passionate about and something I love learning about. So feel free to dive in, ask a few questions, or plug some through on LinkedIn in the future if you feel so free.
Thanks very much, Odin. Are there any questions? My question would have been, what do you follow and what do you read? But that's all been taken care of. Yeah.
I was lucky to jump on the last one. I got all the questions and put them in mine. I was like, oh, I'll be okay. Yeah. Anyway, I think that just about covers it. I think the other thing, just finally on the reading front and just learning front, it's really accepting that these things are here to stay. It's not something we're going to find quick hacks and quick solutions for in social. It's something that we can use to really leverage opportunity and points of difference. If you're the person that has adapted to this strategy, to these tenets faster and more effectively, you're going to perform better. It's something I'm trying to do every single day. So yeah, dive into your readings. If you find anything cool, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and we can have a bit of a chat.
Right, okay, but then I think we're a bit over time, so I suggest we wrap up here if there are no questions. And thanks everyone for joining, and have a good rest of your week. Yeah, thank you.
Beautiful, thanks guys.
Thank you.